today's episode, Liz and I learn all about eating disorders from Dr. Lauren Barnes. From gender differences to distinctions and definitions to prevalence and recovery, Dr. Barnes shares why it's important to tackle these tough issues together as a couple and offers tips and resources that offer hope and healing. Dr. Lauren A. Barnes is an associate clinical professor in the School of Family Life and the clinical director for BYU's Marriage and Family Therapy graduate program. Prior to her faculty appointment at BYU in 2013, she worked as a therapist at Center for Change, treating girls and women struggling with eating disorders within a residential treatment setting. She maintains a small private practice where she primarily works with those struggling with body image, eating disorders, and life challenges within their families. During her free time, Lauren loves baking, especially cakes and cookies, walking or hiking, playing piano, and loves socializing with good friends and family. One of her current passions is speaking at women's body image retreats because it combines her love of connecting with people, learning, and engaging in fun activities. She's married to Aaron, and they have a son and daughter. We hope you enjoy the show. Hey friends, welcome to another episode of the Stronger Marriage Connection podcast. I'm Dr. Dave here at Utah State University alongside Dr. Liz Hale, our licensed clinical psychologist and marriage family therapist. We are bringing you the best we have in research and tips and tools and resources to help you create the marriage of your dreams. Okay, I'm eager today to dive into a discussion about eating disorders and how they influence both men and women in their marriage. Liz, I'm a little bit, ashamed that I don't know more about this important topic. It's a critical topic. I'm super excited about learning more. We're joined by an expert at Brigham Young University, known about this topic. She's going to enlighten us. She's going to help us all to learn a little bit more about what we can do individually as well as in our couple relationships. Welcome to the show, Dr. Lauren Barnes.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, as I mentioned, Laura, super eager to listen, to do a lot of asking questions and soaking all of this in. Let's start big picture though. Can you start by telling us a little bit about you and your story and the work that you do at BYU, how you got involved in this and the why and what you offer to individuals and couples?
Yeah. So I started working with women who were struggling with eating disorders during my master's program in marriage and family therapy. I was co-facilitating a group with somebody you just recently had on the podcast, Dr. Carly LeBaron. She and I ran an eating disorder group over at our women's services. And at that time, it was just something that we just fell into. We just wanted some extra hours in a different place. And we liked each other. So we were like, let's do this together. So I started that and then continued into a doctoral program. The third year, when we were working on dissertation, I chose to also take a full-time job off-site at Center for Change. And that got me the opportunity to see this in a whole different way, working with girls and women who were struggling at an inpatient level, which is quite a bit more severe than the outpatient women I had been working with on the college campus. So at BYU, I'm currently the clinical director of our marriage and family therapy program. So I've just lived in this program, it seems, my entire graduate school and career, and I'll probably be here until I retire. So here, my full-time job is the clinical director, and then on the side, I keep a small private practice. And at any given point, probably about a quarter to 3/4 of those are women or other individuals struggling with body image, eating disorders, disordered eating.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
And it doesn't just affect the individual, Lauren, right?
No.
This affects couples and families. Give us a little insight onto what an eating disorder can do.
Yeah. So eating disorders for years and years have been they've had the highest mortality of any mental illness. So more people were dying of this. That's just recently been replaced. So that's kind of the stark, awful, worst case scenario there is death. But when somebody is struggling with an eating disorder, it's a mental illness, and they also often have other things that line up with that, like anxiety, depression, ADHD, post-traumatic stress, things like that. And we know, and I think, Liz, you're trained as an MFT as well, we believe that people who exhibit symptoms, the way we act is going to impact the people around us. So if I'm struggling with something, or if I have behavior in a certain way, that is going to impact my family. It could be my spouse, it could be my parents, it could be my friends, all of these other people, because we're always in various systems.
Mm-hmm. How long has eating disorders been around, Lauren? I mean, is there historically, do we know much, or the amount, the stats of how many are involved with eating disorders today? Are those numbers out?
So this is all sorts of hypothesizing and best guesswork. We do think that eating disorders have been around for a long, long time. I think the first one was likely diagnosed in the 1600s. But if we look at even religion and culture, we can look at how some cultures would interact with their bodies and with religion, such as fasting, or such as going without food, such as going without drink. And it was probably a form of purification, right? So we see things going back that were many, many days of fasting. But the first time we have record of somebody looking at this kind of behavior of going without food or doing some kind of purging behavior was about the 1600s. I think there's so much that plays into this. If we look at...
It's complicated.
Yes, it's so complicated. And yes. I think the standard of what, we tend to judge status, I think, based on appearance. And we can see that when we look at old artwork, right? Body shapes and sizes change depending. Did I have access to food? Did I not have access to food? What kind of food did I have? And I think some of those themes kind of play into what we see today.
Yeah. I'm curious, Lauren, I don't even want to guess, but I'm assuming that there's some gender differences. I don't know the numbers on this. Can you tell us a little bit about what, the research on gender differences and eating disorders?
Yeah. So we tend to think of eating disorders as a women's issue. And for years and years, one of the criteria to actually be diagnosed with anorexia was the loss of a menstrual period, which in itself would be a women's issue. When I started doing this work about 15 years ago, it was about 1 in 10 eating disorders was a male. And now it's as high as 1 in 3 or 4. So wow, really? About 25% of those with an eating disorder tend to be men. And if we look at gender nonconforming people, the rates are even higher. They're more likely to have an eating disorder than their cisgender peers. Wow. So that's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
I know, crap.
Wow.
Yeah. Men in general tend to be diagnosed later. I think it's harder I don't know if this is just a stereotype or if it's based in research. I want to say part of it's research based. Men in general tend to be less seeking of mental health help and medical help. So the rates at which men are being diagnosed, they tend to be diagnosed later in life than a woman who would usually come around adolescence is one of the peak times for an eating disorder to develop. And men report in general that they're usually feeling either too thin or too heavy. So it's kind of interesting to see the dichotomy there.
But they're waiting longer to admit it or to get help or anything. So those stats could be, a lot more men perhaps are experiencing this, feeling this, struggling with this, but not reaching out, right?
Mm-hmm. Which is so sad.
It is. Yeah. Wow.
Because help does help, sounds like.
It does.
Right? There is some hope with eating disorders.
Yeah, there is some hope. So the latest research I've seen says that about 2/3 of people who want recovery are able to be fully recovered. And I know there's some debate about, well, are you always in recovery? Is this like once an addict, always an addict? But this says that they're no longer engaging in the symptomatic behavior and they're able to go on and not have an eating disorder interfere with their life. So that's pretty awesome.
That is awesome. And, focusing on the 2/3 is terrific. And it's heartbreaking that the 1/3 may continue to just suffer. Is that right? Kind of throughout their life, Lauren, is that? And
Yeah, or they might have some lapses, right? So maybe, I don't know what these studies use as indicators of in recovery, but usually it's, I have not engaged in eating disorder behavior for X number of years. So maybe that 1/3 is like, well, I can go like 5 years and then I have a slip up. Or this part is really hard for me. And a lot of it is mental, right? This is a diagnosed mental illness. So maybe the thoughts of food are still impacting them.
Yeah. It should be understandable since it is such a part of our life.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We need food to live. So we know there's different distinctions of different eating disorders, anorexia, purging, binging, purging.
Yeah.
What's the difference? Let's talk about some specifics about body image versus disordered eating versus an eating disorder.
Yeah. So I think there's some overlap in the language that we use, eating disordered versus disordered eating. Like some of that overlap may be excessive exercising. I see that a lot here in Utah, or binge eating or skipping meals. I work with the college population, and I think the statistics say that 8 in 10 college-aged adults engage in some kind of disordered eating. And from my personal experience, I think that's because they don't eat frequently enough. They're like, well, I had class from 7 to 3, so now I'm eating breakfast, lunch, and dinner after. So it has some overlap there, and we need to be aware of that. However, an eating disorder would be diagnosed using the DSM, right? So disordered eating can be like, well, I have this kind of period of time, this kind of period of time. Whereas an eating disorder is, it's consistent over time, and it interferes with life.
Okay, that's helpful. I didn't realize that distinction, Lauren. Which, yeah, it feels like the college years, especially. It's just late nights, and you have skip this, and it's fast food because I don't have a kitchen, maybe in my apartment or whatever it is. It's just all over the place with their eating, which then affects, right?
It affects everything.
Everything else in our lives depends on what we eat. How we move, our diet, our sleep, those things combined can wreck them, especially, I would say college students, those that I deal with here at USU. I'm curious, you mentioned this a little bit, but I'm curious about other, I guess, things that eating disorders are related to. You mentioned mental health, anxiety, depression. Are there other, compulsive habits, addictions that eating disorders are related to?
Yeah. So one way I like to talk about eating disorders, to teach it, is to talk about the tortoise and the hare. And the tortoise is pretty slow and methodical, perfectionistic, rigid. And those types of people tend to develop, or at least, okay, they don't tend to develop. That was terrible wording. They would be more prone to something like anorexia. And then bulimia is a little bit more like the hare in that story. Really, really fast, maybe a little more impulsive, risk-taking, things like that. Probably a lot of fun to be with. And unfortunately, those who develop bulimia, it's harder to predict when they'll die. So that's just kind of an interesting distinction there between what tends to be some personality characteristics of anorexia versus bulimia. And there are other eating disorders here too. And there is a lot of overlap with dual diagnoses. Some people estimate 95% of people with an eating disorder have another diagnosis as well, whether that's ADHD or anxiety or something like that.
Sexual compulsivity or porn use or those types of habits as well, you see?
Yeah. So if I'm more likely to be a little more impulsive or not think through things before I act, I might be more likely to develop some other things, whether that's drug dependence or sexual compulsion and things like that. But tying this into a marriage, right? I know that's what this podcast is. It's been so fascinating for me. And I've tried to find research on this. So this could just be in my little practice here. But I often see people who have a history of an eating disorder partner with somebody who has sexual compulsive type behaviors. And in my practice, trying to make sense of that, I'm like, oh, this is very interesting. And now we're treating what looks like two very different things, but I do think what's underlying each of them is the same, right? So how am I able to regulate? What am I able to control? Here's a way that I can feel better. Liz, you mentioned food is everywhere here, right? It is part of life. So, and sex is something that is part of life, right? So it's kind of interesting to work with people to get underneath and in a couple relationship highlight, oh, you both want connection. You both want stability. You both are feeling a little out of control. How can we work with you as a couple to help you co-regulate a little better?
I think the college campus is so interesting to me. I think that's where I really had more disordered eating. When I was a freshman at Utah State, I was a dancer. I was homesick, gained weight, and didn't eat at the sorority house, even though that would probably have been a better place for me to eat a meal. Parents paid for it, but I would just eat other junk stuff. I don't know. So what's going on at BYU? Is there something, because you mentioned the numbers are fairly high with disordered eating. Is that right?
Yeah. And I think that's like throughout all college campuses, right? So I don't know that we've ever had permission or somebody has actually gathered data on eating disorders here at BYU. I would be so curious to see it. Because I don't even know if they still run this, but we used to be ranked as like the most hot campus or something like that. And that in itself, like your history as a dancer, when people are looking at you constantly, we're going to be thinking about our body. Well, what can I control?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And
you're in this pool. You're in this pool of other people. There's obviously that comparison, right? There's dating, and oh my goodness, I think it's tough.
We'll be right back after this brief message. And we're back. Well, let's dive right in.
My heart goes out to students. And I'm just curious, less than the statistics, I'm interested in what is the treatment or what's going to help our younger people so that they have a better relationship with food and their bodies.
Yeah. Okay. I love that. I think the first thing is recognizing when you come to college, your body is not done growing, right? I would probably never talk to any of my 40-year-old friends and be like, why don't you have the same body you had when you were 18? What's wrong with you? Right? But when we first start college, we kind of anticipate, I need to keep my 18-year-old body forever. So that's kind of something we need to switch. Recognize, okay, my brain's not done developing until my late 20s. My body is going to shift over life. And recognizing that that is part of life. And instead of valuing certain types of bodies more than others, so in our culture here, we kind of talk about the thin ideal that is associated. When women see that, we think, then I'll be liked, then I'll have money, then I'll have success, then I'll have power. And that's what we want, right? Who doesn't want that? People will like me. I'll be connected. So instead of saying, wait a second, do I have to have a certain body for those things? Or do those things happen because of how I am with people? So recognizing how we talk about our bodies, how we talk about food, those things can really impact us. Doctors Lindsay and Lexi Kite, who are based in Salt Lake, they wrote a book called More Than a Body. And one of the quotes they say from there is, positive body image isn't believing your body looks good. It is knowing your body is good, regardless of how it looks.
Oh, that's good.
So my body is good. Yeah. Every body is a good body. And let's take care of it.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Focusing on what our bodies can do, right?
Mm-hmm.
What they can do versus how they just look.
Right. So function over like the features, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think spouses have such power here, right? Yeah. Our partner gets to see it. Yeah. Our partner gets to see us in our most like raw, naked form, right? Whether that's having sex or having children, all of the things they see us go through, decade after decade with our bodies. So especially we need to be aware of how am I talking about my partner and how are they talking about me and what are my kids noticing? This is a bad example, but I'm going to give it anyway. It's kind of extreme. I had a client once where she talked and she was in here for eating disorder help. And she said, every time I go to Walmart with my parents, my dad points out the people, and if they're in a bigger body, he just makes fun of them. And I'm so afraid that someday I'm going to grow up and be in a bigger body, and then my dad's not going to like me.
Ooh,
So, and this is like this cute little 14-year-old, right? We need to be aware how we're talking to our partner and how we're talking in front of children and others. I remember my dad, he never said anything awful about my mom and her appearance, and that has stuck with me, right? We're going to look for somebody who treats me that well, who compliments me, and who's okay that I'm going to have stretch marks after having kids, right? And who's going to be supportive in all the ways that my body will change.
The messaging is loud and clear, isn't it? Regardless if it's acceptance or if it's criticism, we're hearing it. We're vulnerable.
We're so vulnerable, and we're so aware. And I think sometimes it's easy for us to say, oh, it's a 4-year-old. They don't know. Let me tell you what, when my daughter was 4, she would notice if I said something bad about myself. She would call me out now. I am like vigilant, right? Because if mom says that she doesn't like how she looks or this isn't fitting the correct way, she's going to know.
Mm-hmm. Laura, I'm curious about, so treatment for this, let's say it's a married couple or a committed couple living together, and one partner is really struggling with this. Do you work with them individually? Do you work with them as a couple? And I guess a related question, are there some do's, some tips, some do's and don'ts about if you're the other partner, right? My partner, my wife is really struggling with this. What are some things that I can do or maybe even not do that would be helpful or not so helpful?
Okay. I have so many thoughts. So re-ask the question as I come back around.
First question. Yeah. So because I'm super excited about these questions. The first question was treatment. So couples or individuals, do you see individuals or couple, if they're in a couple relationship and why, or when do you bring them in and talk about both of them?
Okay, so my bias here is you should usually have as many people of the system as possible in the therapy room. So if it's a couple, yes, I will probably meet with them still one-on-one because I want to know what's going on, and I'm going to do a lot of assessment, and I'm still going to do that with their partner, right? So this is a funny thing because when you bring somebody else into therapy, they will tell things from their perspective, and they will tell the therapist everything that you're lying about. It's a wonderful thing. So I might have a wife in here, and she might say, oh, I think I eat about 1,500 calories a day. And her husband might say, a what? No, you eat maybe like an apple and then a salad. And then I don't even know if you eat dinner because you're running around and like helping the kids, right? So it gets that additional perspective, which is so helpful in assessment and treatment. And we know there's less research on couples struggling with eating disorders than with adolescents and families. But we do know that people who are coupled with somebody who has an eating disorder feel really extreme amounts of stress. So this was interesting. Not that I think we should compare disorders, but I'm about to do it. So this was in a study from 2001. It said caregiving or being a partner to somebody with anorexia is reported to be more stressful than for bulimia nervosa or even schizophrenia.
Wow.
I was like, what?
Wow.
That's a heavy emotional load.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right? And so
because food are meals, right? It's our connecting. It's our, it's everything.
Well,
and if a partner's not eating or if I have to worry about them, that is stressful.
It's so stressful. And to know that the reason they're not eating is so deep, right? It could be, well, they're not even regulating their emotions or dealing with this, and then they're picking up that emotional load over there as well. So they're having to work with like, well, I'm mad at you, but I'm sad and I'm scared. You might be dying. And now I'm anxious about you and I'm worried about this. Maybe I feel guilty. Like, how have I contributed to this? So it's really important, I think, to bring the couple in and to make sure that you can have each of them have space where they feel validated. And I think a good therapist, too, is going to hold them accountable and say, what are we working toward? right? What are our measurable goals here?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, then the
Let's
related
talk about
question I gotta sneak in is the kind of the do's and the don'ts. Let's say that I notice my wife is struggling. Hey, she doesn't admit it. I don't want to need help, anything like that. It's like, man, do I go behind her back? How do I do this? Are there some?
Do I start snapping pictures? Right?
Yeah. Like, no, I know. I saw you didn't eat that or whatever. Yeah.
It's so tricky. So this is assuming you have a good relationship. I think the important thing that you need to highlight, and sometimes we need to say outside to our partner when they're engaging in some behavior or they're having some symptoms that are worrisome to us, is to preface things with, I'm really worried about you and I love you so much. I want the very best for you. When I talk to people, I say, you just blame me. You say, I just went to something and I heard this woman talk and she mentioned these as symptoms and I've noticed those in you. And I'm really worried. What can I do to help? Adults are usually less defensive than teenagers. So that's a bonus here. Because they are committed to you, right? As a partner, they're going to hopefully see your love and your care and hopefully own up to some of those behaviors. Usually they will diminish them a little bit, but they're less likely to go into full denial. So just list the behaviors. Well, I've noticed that you're not eating as frequently, or you're eating smaller amounts, or I've noticed that every time you eat this, you make comments. So start calling people out right at the comments. Oh, I'm such a bad person for eating a brownie. Honey, whether you eat a brownie or not doesn't affect how you are as a person. You're actually a great person. I don't want to hear you make comments like that. That's sad for me because I know how awesome you are.
Mm-hmm.
So you can intervene at any level.
Something. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think some people are afraid to say something, right? They'll make it worse by pointing it out. But you're saying just kind of level with the loved one.
Yeah. You have leverage. You're in a relationship with them. This isn't just some random outsider coming in. So it's motivated by love. You should say something.
Mm. You mentioned finding a good therapist, Lauren. What should people look for when they want therapy for eating disorder recovery? I mean, it definitely is a specialty, is it not?
Yeah. So there are some designations that are certifications, right? You could be a certified eating disorder specialist. That's one of them. That's done by one of the international organizations. But I think when you're interviewing a therapist, which you should do, and it's okay that it might take 3 or 4 therapists for you to find a good fit. Do some research. Where has this person worked? How do they know this information? Because we can market ourselves as an eating disorder therapist, right? Anything. It is true. So ask them, what kind of work have you done into this? How often do you attend trainings? How do you keep up on the latest research? And you're going to want a licensed therapist, because that protects you as a consumer. And then usually when I'm working with somebody, they also need to have a registered dietitian and a doctor as well. It takes a whole team.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. That makes sense to have that team effort to really help tackle this tough struggle. Lauren, you mentioned that there's some research that talks about implicit family rules or the family environment that can contribute to individuals developing eating disorders. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So I want to preface this with all families make mistakes. None of us are perfect parents. None of us are perfect spouses. So whenever we're looking at research, we're looking at changes in the mean, right? The average here. But it is kind of interesting as we do cluster analysis to figure out which kind of implicit or unspoken family rules may contribute to the likelihood of somebody developing an eating disorder. So, for example, there was a study that looked at this and found for adolescents, when they were in a family with rules about we need to appear like we look perfect, that we look like everything's fine on the outside. We don't express when we're mad. We don't express when we're sad. Things like that tend to contribute more to the possibility of somebody internalizing, not knowing how to express emotion, and maybe turning to an eating disorder as a way to cope.
Good point. Well, it's just, there's just a lot to this. And I'd love for our listeners to know more about you. Or where can they go to find out about the resources you offer and anything else that you really want to, how else you want to get the message out?
Yeah. Okay. So I would first tell everybody they should read the book, Intuitive Eating. I didn't write it. I'm just telling you all it's awesome. And then that book written by Doctor's Kite, More Than a Body, is a really good start. To find me, I am on Instagram. I just try to post some things there that can be helpful, but I'm not active all the time, right? So it's usually just reposting other people's awesome things. And people can just find me by looking up my email address online.
Okay. Yeah, that's great, Lauren. We'll put links to the, let's see, Intuitive Eating and More Than a Body. We'll put links to those in the show notes for people, like direct links, so they can go and get those, and then they can find you as well. Lauren, as we wrap up, we like to ask all our guests a couple of questions. The first one is, what do you feel like is the key to a stronger marriage connection?
Ooh, okay. I knew you were going to ask this, and I've been back and forth about a few things. So I think intentionality with love. I think that's very helpful. And that can impact the way we talk to people, the time we spend with people, how we treat them. But that's what I keep coming back to.
I have not had a guest. We've not had a guest that has said anything like that, Lauren. I really like that. Intentionality with love.
I know. I'm like, how can I encompass this, right? After treating couples for years, we're like, what helps them and what hurts them?
Yeah. Super good. Love that answer. Second question is this, Lauren. What's your takeaway? We call it a takeaway of the day. Take-home message that you want our listeners to remember from our discussion.
So one takeaway. Ooh, see, I'm already making two, Dave. Sorry. Okay. One takeaway is eating disorders are very pervasive, right? So it's estimated up to 9% of people will experience an eating disorder, which means it's pretty likely you know somebody who has one. So just keep in mind that it is really complex. It's more than just eat food. It's more than exercise this much. It's more than eat this type of food. They really require some research-based care and attention. And if you're struggling with an eating disorder, don't be afraid to reach out for help. There's lots of help available.
Yeah, all kinds of great resources and help through that struggle. Liz, what about you? What's your takeaway today?
Yeah. Well, and they can start hopefully by looking at Lauren's resources, right, Dave? That will be great. That's a beautiful start. And then, Lauren, you can refer them maybe if do you see people online, by the way? Okay.
Yes, I do telehealth, and I'm pretty well networked. So I can, if I can't see you, I'll give you a list of people who could see you.
That is music to our ears here. Stronger Marriage Connection. Good for you. So I love this thought of function over feature, Dave. I think that's really quite beautiful. Even in just talking about our kids, like, oh, your body's so strong. We can go run now. Let's go run this hill. Isn't that wonderful? Our bodies can do this. And we're breathing and we don't even know it. And our whole body, all these organs are working in unison and without us having to direct them. The body is phenomenal. Dave, what about you? What's your greatest takeaway with our time with Dr. Barnes today on eating disorders?
Yeah, this has been really helpful, Lauren. Very, especially, I would say for me, just enlightening me on this in this really important area. I guess I didn't realize the stress, the spillover stress that you mentioned when you cited that statistic, like the weight that both carry and the struggle that this can be, and the longevity of how long this road, this journey can be for both partners in a relationship, that this can be a real struggle and a real stressor and strain on relationships. And so I echo that, reaching out, getting help, learning more about that. And when you see something, say something. And I love that you say, I'm worried, I care about you, I love you. And I've noticed this or that, pointing out those things in a kind way. So I appreciate that. Dr. Laura Barnes, this has been so helpful. We sure appreciate you taking time to come and share your wisdom and knowledge with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It was great to meet you.
Yes, thank you. All right, friends, that does it for us. We'll see you next time on another episode of Stronger Marriage Connection.
And remember, it's the small and simple changes that create a stronger marriage connection. See you soon.
Bye. Thanks for joining us today. Hey, do us a favor and take a few minutes to subscribe to our podcast and the Utah Marriage Commission YouTube channel, where you can watch this and every episode of the show. When you hit the like button and leave a comment, your feedback helps us improve the show. And don't forget to share this episode with a friend. You can also follow and connect with us on Instagram at Stronger Marriage Life and on Facebook at Stronger Marriage. Be sure to share with us what topics you want us to explore or what you loved about today's episode. If you want even more resources to improve your relationship connection, visit our website at strongermarriage.org, where you'll find free workshops, webinars, relationship surveys, and more. Each episode of Stronger Marriage Connection is hosted and sponsored by the Utah Marriage Commission at Utah State University. And finally, a big thanks to our producers Rex Polanis and Alexis Alcott and the team at Utah State University. And you, our audience, you make this show possible.